Hello everybody. Hello. Can you hear me at the back? Yes? No? Yes? No? Right. Well, welcome to this 75th anniversary lecture of Scarborough Archaeological and Historical Society. This is actually our first live lecture since the pandemic started. We've had plenty of online lectures. We've been very successfully doing that. In fact, tonight is also the first hybrid one, so I think I'm also online. So, welcome world. Hello world. Yes. So welcome to the Old Parcels Office. Actually, although it's called the Old Parcels Office, this is actually Scarborough's first purpose-built excursion station. And if you'd come in this building 10 years ago, it was derelict. And it's been restored by a group called Scarborough Studios Limited, who I've been working with. And why I'm telling you this is that when we first came in here, after the contractors had finished, we came into this room and thought, wow, what a fantastic space for artists. All this light coming down. Wonderful, huge space, which it is. But it does mean that we can't see the slides all that well tonight because of the light coming down. Pray for clouds coming across. No, don't. On the 20th of June, 1947, 10 people met at Scarborough Museum, what we now call the Rotunda Museum, and set about founding what was then called Scarborough and District Archaeological Society. Their first meeting, public meeting, wasn't until the 11th of July of 1947, but we take 20th of June 1947 as being our birthday. So this is the first event of various things we're doing to celebrate or to commemorate or whatever our 75 years in existence. We've also just started, for instance, scanning and putting online all our publications, or the ones which are out of print, and various other things will be taking place as well over the next year. One of the founder members of the society was a chap called John Moore, and as it happened, in 1947 was the year in which he found the first piece of worked flint. He was working out in the Carlands near between Flixton and Scarborough, and that was the first indication, I think, that human activity was taking place on the Carlands. And he did more research, and eventually Graham Clark was brought in, and the site was excavated, and that we now know that as Star Carr, world famous site. So it's appropriate that tonight's lecture is given by Nicky Milner, who has done so much more work out at Star Carr and Flixton Island and around Lake Flixton, which he will be telling you about a little bit later on. And one of the things that pleases me is that in the relatively recent book on Star Carr that Nicky and others wrote, the dedication is, we dedicate this book to John Moore, without whom we might never have known anything about the site of Star Carr. And I'm really pleased that that's in there. Before I introduce Nicky, I just want to spend a few minutes looking at the early history of the society and where we're going to in the future and what we're up to now. If I can get the first slide to come up.
So just check the switch to the side.
There we are. Right, sorry about that. There was an archaeological society founded in Scarborough in the early 19th century, of which we know absolutely nothing, Other than that, in 1853, it was amalgamated into the Scarborough Philosophical Society and became the Scarborough Philosophical and Archaeological Society. Although it was never called that, it was always referred to as the Philosophical Society. We assume that that original society was organised around the first Baron Lounsborough, who was actually the first president of the British Archaeological Association before he became Baron Lounsborough. By the 1930s, that society, the Philosophical Society, was in terminal decline. And in 1937, Scarborough Corporation took over the Scarborough Museum, so what we now call the Rotunda Museum. And they appointed this chap on the right as their first curator, T.L. Gwatkin, Tom Gwatkin. This photograph's taken in the 1960s when he'd made a name for himself as the director of the Reading Museum Service. He made a bit of a name for himself. There were occasions when he stood in for Mortimer Wheeler on the animal, forgotten the name of it, that television programme anyway. But Tom Gwatkin hijacked, I think is the best way of putting it, a meeting of the Scarborough Field Naturalist Society with a model of a round barrow and developed a lot of interest in that. And on the back of that, he gathered a little team together who did some archaeological excavating, two principal sites, Osborne Lodge, a Bronze Age burial mound, and Spittal Corner near Stakston, which was a Saxon cemetery. The war then intervened, and a lot of them disappeared and went off to fight in the war. And that group didn't come back together until 1947, when they met in the museum and founded the society. Under the leadership of Tom Gwatkin, who was the society's first secretary. He didn't stay very long because he went on back to Reading. I just want to talk about one or two of the early members of the society. These two in particular made rather big names for themselves regionally. On the left is Frank Rimington, who did a lot of work on Levisham Moor and some early work on deserted medieval villages, Osgerby and Hatterboard here in Scarborough. In fact, when shepherds, I think it was, were developing the land at Osgerby, which was the site of the deserted medieval village, they actually named a street after him. So anybody who lives in Rimington Way, it was said that that was at the time, it was the only street in the country specifically named after an amateur archaeologist. I don't know whether that's still the case or not, but a nice story. And on the right is Raymond Hayes, who was a classic autodidact, really, and his knowledge of the North York Moors was absolutely phenomenal. Did a lot of the photography for the Society's work and for others. For those of you who are here in person, we've got some of our early photograph albums on display, and there's photographs of that Raymond Hayes took at Orchard Fields in Malton during the excavations in the 50s of that Roman site, which I think are the only surviving photographic archive. John Moore is a bit of an enigma. Our records of him are very scant. Why he started work at Flixton Carr or at the Carrs, we don't know. And he seems to have been doing quite a lot of work out there alone. I was quite intrigued by a little quote from Raymond Hayes in a copy of our transactions. This is when Raymond was reminiscing about his days with Scarborough District Archaeological Society. John Moore was the first treasurer of the society. He became notable as a discoverer of Star Carr and the Flixton site, later excavated by Professor Clark and published by Cambridge University Press. When Moore was first digging at Star Carr, he invited Alan Precious and myself to visit this important site, where he claimed to have found horse bones 9,000 years old. We rode there on bikes. Like most days that summer, it was brilliantly sunny. We found the location, but could not see anyone about. It was in a field of young corn, 6 to 8 inches high. Then we noticed a pile of black peaty soil with a trench behind it. From this came clods of earth into the air. The trench was 5 feet deep at least, and on the bottom was Moore paddling about in inky black water. I hope Nicky's got some pictures of this classic inky black water for us to look at. It brings back so many memories. But that's rather tells us, I think, that John Moore was working alone, and I think that was the way he operated. We do know, I've done a little bit of research into him, that he was born in Blackpool, at the rival resort, in 1916, and lived in this rather modest house on the left there. His father William was a chef in hotels. My first record of him is in 1916, when he's the chef at the Midland Hotel in Bradford, the Midland Railway Hotel. He moves to Blackpool and is the chef at the Clifton Hotel, a big hotel on Talbot Square in Blackpool. And then in the 1930s he moves to Scarborough. I must have gone up in the world because they moved to Trinity Road here, number 7 Trinity Road, which they're living in the 1930s. Deserves a blue plaque, I think. Mm-hmm. But what happens in that period that piques John Moore's interest in the Carlands, we don't know. Other members of the society are digging what you might call obvious sites, deserted medieval village at Osgerby, Lewisham Moor and so on, and yet he chooses a field out in the middle of nowhere. It's all very enigmatic. And he is the author of our first publication. There it is. I might even have a copy somewhere. Of our very first publication. I think it came out in 1950. That's a big change from what we publish now. And we've got several of these on for sale, but this is the start of a very active publications record on all sorts of sites, covering everywhere from Scarborough through to Rosedale Mines, archaeology and history. We're both a historical society and an archaeological one. So we've got John Moore to thank for getting us started on that. And of course we publish our transactions periodically, which John Moore never contributed to. He seemed to publish in the Yorkshire Archaeological Journal rather than in our transactions. Another chap I'd like to mention is Jeff Willey, second from the left. This is an ad hoc group called our speleological group. It doesn't exist anymore, but they were actively involved in archaeological work in caves. This pointer's not working. The young chap, second from the right, is David Lamplow, who was an even younger chap, actually worked on Clark's site at Star Carr. So he can't be here tonight, unfortunately, but we've still got that link going back to Clark's work at Star Carr, which is a tremendous thing, really. But Jeff Willey was a professional photographer and did a lot of site photography, including photographs for Clark. This is just one of them. We have in our archive about half a dozen photographs, and they're a very precious resource, which we're currently thinking what to do with, you know, as part of our anniversary year, as to whether they should be deposited in a national repository or whatever. I understand, it is true, is it, Nicky, that Clark destroyed his archive?
There are some other photographs.
There are some slides, yes, in Cambridge. Yes. But everything went, yeah. So we're lucky to have these. And finally, Jim Rutter, who didn't succeed Gwotkin to the curatorship. There was another chap in between, but in 1950 he became curator of the Scarborough Museum, and he was instrumental in maintaining good relations not only between the museum and the society, but both the museum and the society and Clark, which resulted in some of the artefacts coming to Scarborough, which again we're very, very lucky to have. And he did extensive work both with Raymond Hayes and Frank Crimington. Oh, it's gone too far. That's just a sample of the sites they did between 1947 and 1974. The whole of the North York Moors was their field, really. It's shrunken now because there's other societies set up. But in those days there was no societies at Helmsley, for instance, or whatever. So they ranged far and wide. As a kid, growing up in Great Ayton near Teesside, I remember seeing Raymond Hayes excavating on Great Ayton Moor. I didn't know it at the time, who he was at the time, but they'd come all the way from Scarborough. It's a good hour and a half's journey. And then we had a bit of a hiatus, and from the 80s, Trevor Pearson and I got going in Scarborough town, and we've investigated over 80 sites. Some of them are just test bits, but there you go. And again, begun to range widely at Saltwick Allen Works, done a lot of work at Hanging Grimstone, Deserted Village, Brompton Castle Hill. We've been fortunate in two major sites and been able to get scheduled monument consent to work on those sites. And we're currently finishing off at Aldby Park near Buttercrown. We've got an ongoing project at Thorne Park near Scarborough. So our 75th anniversary commemorations aren't a nostalgia fest. We're very much looking forward to 75 years more digging and active historical research. I probably won't be here myself to see the next 75 years, but we are still a very, very active society, and we owe a deep debt of gratitude to people like Frank Crimington, Raymond Hayes and John Moore, and later on Jim Rutter, for founding the society and setting up a team which has contributed so much to archaeology regionally and nationally, dare I say. Right, that's all I would like to say. So I'll now ask Nicky Milner to give her talk. I understand Nicky first started digging as a school kid with Dominic Powsland just down the road at East Heslington, and then got the bug, presumably, Nicky. So she's now Professor of Archaeology at the University of York and Head of Departments there. So, Nicky Milner, thank you very much.
And which do I press on the... Right, okay. Great, okay, thank you. I'll give you that thing. Thank you very much. Yes, I went on a dig for 3 days as part of a Duke of Edinburgh thing and ended up staying 6 weeks and carried on and on and on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Vale of Pickering and Star Carr, but also another site, Flixton Island, which is a bit older than Star Carr. Both sites were found by John Moore, so it's lovely to hear that history. Thank you, Chris. And you know, it is absolutely true. Without John Moore, you wouldn't be sitting listening to this today, basically. So this is part of a big project that we had going. We started digging at Star Carr about 2004, I think it was, and we worked there for about 15 years. But in the last 3 years of that, last 5 years of that period, we got a big European grant to study hunter-gatherers a bit more broadly, beyond just Star Carr, and think about how they were living between about 10,000 and 8,000 BC. And just before I get into the detail of the sites, just like to remind people or introduce you to the timeline that we're looking at here. So about 10,000 BC is about the end of the last ice age. Technically, it's 9,650 BC when climate changes quite dramatically, and so the environment starts changing, and this part of the world becomes a bit more of a nicer place to be. Plants start growing, and people start coming in and living here through the 100 or so years after that climate change. And if we look at this timeline here, we've got from about 10,000 BC right through to 4,000 BC is the whole of the Mesolithic period. Right at the end of the last ice age, that's the end of the Paleolithic, and then we've got about 5,000 years of hunter-gatherers living in this country. And then we get the introduction of farming, and pottery comes in at about 4,000 BC. And then we've got the Neolithic, and then the Bronze Age, and this is when Stonehenge is, you start getting the construction at Stonehenge, then the Iron Age, Roman Britain, and so on. But hopefully you can see from this diagram here that actually for half of this time, half of what we call the Holocene, we've got hunter-gatherers living in this country. And what really excites me about the Mesolithic period is that we know very, very little about it, even though it's this massive amount of time. And that's what makes it so fun to dig in this period, because everything that you find, you make new discoveries, and I will be telling you about some of those today. So this is where we're located. As you all know, this map's usually more useful for people who are not living in the Scarborough, who don't know where Star Carr is. But it's very close to where it's Flixton, Folkestone, around that area. And there used to be a lake there called Lake Flixton. But sort of 11,000 years ago, it wasn't the same coastline as it is today. Whatever you think about Brexit, in those days we were actually joined to the continent. This white area here is all land. And so that meant that people could move across this big area much more easily than having to get into boats. There are some big rivers there, so somehow they were crossing these areas, but I'll be showing you how there's a lot of connection between particularly Denmark and northern Germany and what we find on some of these sites in this area. So this is another picture of John Moore. This is taken from a newspaper article. And if you're interested in John Moore, there's quite a lot of documentation that we scanned from the museum, and it's part of a collection of materials on the Archaeological Data Service website. So you can read the letters and see the communications between people like John Moore and Rutter and Clark. But as Chris said, it's thanks to him that we know about these sites. And he went out and had a look at this landscape. This is obviously what the landscape looks like today, mainly pasture, fields. And maybe Chris, he was interested in, he seemed to pick up quite early on that this had been a former lake. And he walked up and down the ditches looking for evidence of sites, looking for flint and bone and antler that were coming out of the ditches. So this is what it looks like today from all the work that we've been doing over the last 15 years and well, much longer, 30 years really. We know that this is probably what it looked like 11,000 years ago. So a lake fringed with reeds and a lot of birch woodland around. And sometimes when I drive over this landscape, I try and imagine this different landscape, and it is really very different. How do we know this? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the methods that we employ. And these people in this field are augering. They're taking metal rods and pushing them into the soil and through the peat and seeing how deep the peat is. And peat has grown in this lake environment. It's vegetation that's died off and decomposed and creates these great meters of dark, dirty soil and very, very dark, very black. And if we measure this, we get the contours underneath. And this man with his back towards us is Tim Shadler Hall, who I'm sure some of you will have heard of as well. So Tim did a lot of work in the Vale of Pickering from the mid-70s right through to the early 2000s. And I trained with Tim in the mid-1990s and learned how to excavate these sites. And he set up the Vale of Pickering Research Trust, which their mission was to map the lake accurately through this augering, and also to find other sites and add to the sites that John Moore found. And John Moore found, we think, about 9 or 10, and through the work of the Vale of Pickering Research Trust, we have over 25 sites now, some of them Paleolithic, some of them Mesolithic. And this is the contour map of the lake. You can see it's about 4 kilometres across and 2 kilometres north to south, with some islands on it there. So it's a big area. And through this test pitting round the edge of the lake, that's how we find the sites. So the method was to, about every 15 metres, to put another test pit in and hopefully find some flint in it. And the theory with that is that Star Carr that Clark found was about 30 metres across. So if you do it 15-metre intervals, you're probably going to find a site. As you can see here, this is a very deep trench that this guy's in. He was one of the students from Manchester University when we were digging with colleagues from Manchester and from Chester. He actually used to be a grave digger, and this is exactly the kind of person you need when you're digging these deep holes. And from that, you can see on this map, we've got the different sites, and there are a lot more now that we know, the little red dots. But this one, just here, Flixton Island, we're going to come back to Flixton Island. That's where John Moore first found his first site, Site 1 and Site 2. Star Carr was the 4th site that he found. Another thing that we've been doing is looking more at the environmental and climate records. And this is a team from Royal Holloway and the University of Southampton. And they came up for several years and pulled out these larger cores. You can see that they're having to work quite hard to put big equipment down into the soil and pull out meters and meters of cores. And through this, they're looking for things, they're looking for environmental indicators such as pollen. They look at non-biting midges, which are really good indicators of climate change, oxygen isotopes, and employ all sorts of different methods to build up a picture of the environment and the climate. And this is what the environment and climate records sort of show us. So you remember I said this is right at the end of the last ice age. This bit here, it was very cold, and it was a bit like sort of tundra-like conditions, not particularly hospitable. You can then see there's rapid climate change there, and this rapid climate change, it varied in different places, and no one can know exactly how great it was, but it could have been as much as 5 to 10 degrees in a matter of decades, perhaps even less than that. So it really was quite a, we've got climate change now, but it was a bit even more dramatic than that. You can then see that it's a bit wiggly up and down here, but generally the improvement in climate is bringing in more vegetation is growing, and of course as you get more plants, you get more animals beginning to come in into these areas as well. And with animals, you often get people who are then hunting the animals. But you can, as I say, you can see some blips in that first little bit of warming, and we see that evidence for the blips in the sites that I'm going to be showing you. In terms of the environment's always changing actually throughout this period, throughout the 800 years we know Star Carr was occupied, so right through that period. It starts off with a lake, and it has things like water lilies, it has reeds on the edge, and we call that zone 1. But with all this vegetation dying on the edge of the lake, you do get this build-up of peat, and so it gets more and more peaty and bit less open water, until towards the end there's very little water at all. And of course these changes in that environment are also going to change the kind of animals that are around and how people are living at this location. So this is sort of an indication of what it might have looked like near at the beginning. Then this is a picture of a sort of more swampy kind of environment where perhaps seasonally there wasn't even any water in some seasons. In the summer the water disappears until you get this Carr kind of landscape with no water at all. And so imagine that these changes are happening as well through time. So I'm going to start off with Flixton Island, which is the site, as I say, that John Moore, the first site that John Moore found. And it's right, there's a ditch right up there. That's where I think he must have found I think it was probably bone that he found in that ditch. And he excavated a trench, I think a couple of years here on this site. And this is where he found the horse bone. And we do actually know, somebody who dug with him actually, Chris. Terry Manby apparently helped him out a bit. And I don't know if it was for the full amount of time, but Terry did visit us on site and say that he went to help, and they were having to use hand pumps to get the water out of the trench. It took about 3 hours every morning to get the water out before they could even start digging. And he did also, I think he said that Clark was actually digging at Star Carr at the same time, but refused to give him any students to help or anything. So they really were working quite hard on their own. So these are our excavations. We dug 3 years there. We actually, in our plan, we were going to go back and dig a bit of Moore's Trench out and just look at the stratigraphy and try and understand the environment a bit more. And when the horses that Moore found, did they date to the Paleolithic or did they date to the Mesolithic, and at what point in relation to the Ice Age? But I think it's fair to say we got slightly carried away and did a bit more than just dig Moore's Trench. We did 3 years and dug 3 rather large trenches. So we're back here on Flixton Island there. And this is actually Moore's Trench that we did dig out first of all, this shape here. And he found a lot of horse bone in this trench. We then extended out a lot further. But you can really see it's very interesting stratigraphy, it's very interesting layers of soil. You've got this very dark layer right at the bottom. You've got this really quite thick layer of gravel in between, and then you've got peat again on top. And the peat on the top dates to the Mesolithic. It's got artifacts and things in which show that it is of Mesolithic date. The peat at the bottom is where we find the horse bones. And the gravel in between is a bit of a mystery, I have to say. We've had lots of people have a look at this. But it looks like there's probably some quite major climatic event. Something was happening that was moving this huge amount of gravel and sand across the site. So it was probably one of these abrupt climatic events right after the end of the Ice Age. But this is absolutely brilliant for us as archaeologists, because it separates out these two layers. They may have been actually quite close in time. You know, that gravel event might have occurred under a very short period of time, but it helps separate out the archaeology and gives us a better chance of dating it well. And hopefully you can see here, this is one of our students who was excavating these bones. We've got some here and some here. I think this slide perhaps is better. You've got a lot of bone here and going right up there. And we found lots of assemblages just like this of bone. And they're mainly the vertebra of horses and sometimes the ribs. But we don't really get very many long bones. We get a few of the jaw bones, but not really very many parts of the head. It is mainly the vertebra. And I think we have evidence of about probably 9 or 10 horses which appear to have been butchered right on the edge of this lake. Probably in the water itself, given the preservation of the bones, but very shallow water. And I mean, we're very lucky. We work a bit with Ray Mears, and he's got lots of experience working all around the world with different groups of people and seeing these sorts of things from an anthropological perspective. And so he's talked to us a bit about what this might represent. And it does look like it's possibly one event. Perhaps a lot of horses have been kind of corralled into an ambush and killed all at once, and then butchered, and then the meaty parts of the animals taken away to somewhere else in the landscape for perhaps processing, you know, maybe smoking the meat, or maybe a big feast or whatever. But we're just left with these remains, and it's just very interesting trying to looking at this and trying to think what's actually happened here. It's quite remarkable. But this site is absolutely amazing because it's dating to right at the end of the Paleolithic. Is what's called a long blade site. So people who lived at this time, they with the flint that they used, they made long blades out of flint. They can be very long, but the ones that we've found are probably about this long, and they're using those to butcher these animals. But it's a classic signature of this particular time period, this particular kind of group of people right at the end of the Paleolithic. And what makes this so important for the whole of Europe is that there are very few known sites of this period. I mean, in this country, there's probably around about 30. In the whole of Europe, obviously, a number more. But there's only 4 in the whole of Europe which have animal bones that are preserved from this time period. And this is way more than any other. So it's really giving us an insight into something that we just, a period that we just didn't really know about. And what's really interesting about this is that these are the hunter-gatherers who are living right at the end of the Ice Age. We haven't had the dates back for this site yet. We're literally about to work on them in 2 weeks' time, when Alex Bayliss, who's a world-leading expert in radiocarbon dating, is coming to see us at York and analyse all the dates that we've got. And it's taken years of redating and trying to get good dates on these. It's very, very difficult to get good dates from peat. You get a lot of humic acid contamination. But it's possible that this might be quite close to Star Carr in date. I mean, maybe even just generations away from Star Carr. And the climate's just changing so rapidly that by the time we get to Star Carr, there are no horses at all. So what we're seeing here are the last of the wild horses before they go extinct in this area as well. So it's a very rare site. a very important site, and we hope that once we've got the dates and we finish writing it up, it's going to be one of the most important late Paleolithic sites of this period. What was really lovely about this site as well were these things, and those, I know some of you visited this site, some of you dug at this site, so you'll know what these are. But when we first uncovered the top of the gravel, we thought there's a really strange patterning going on here, and we just couldn't work out what it was really. And we just stood and stared at it for ages, and then suddenly thought, well, maybe do know what this is. And when we excavated out those strange little patterns, we realised that we had hoof prints in the mud. And what was even more cool was that we were finding horse hooves as well. And they fitted really neatly into the prints that were in the mud. And I mean, again, this is extremely rare and very remarkable that this has survived, but it survived because of this gravel band above it and the darkness of the soil. There's just such a contrast there. And so really just before this gravel event happened, whatever it was, some huge torrential downpour or whatever it was, there had been some horses prancing around in this mud, leaving their prints, and then they got covered over by the gravel and left there for 11,000, 12,000 years for us to discover. And it was just really, there's something really amazing about seeing prints like that in the ground. We found another print which looks like a deer. It could be an elk, it could be a deer, showing that there were also other animals in that landscape at the same time. As well at this site, we also found a Mesolithic site just on the top of the island. This hadn't been discovered previously. Lot of flint here, so this is just a little bit later. This lovely axe that we've got here, as well as about 20,000 other pieces of flint actually. But we'll move on to Star Carr, another Mesolithic site which has a lot more to tell us about this period. So this is one of the excavation photographs from Star Carr. You can see these trenches that Clark put in, and all these people digging around in the quite close quarters down there in the mud. And as Chris said, John Moore found this site. It was the fourth site he found, but he got in touch with Graham Clark, and this was absolutely wonderful for Graham Clark because he'd always wanted to find a site with organic remains from the Mesolithic period. They were being found in Denmark, and he had contacts on the continent, so he did know about these other sites, and he wanted to find one here, because the organic preservation that you get from a site like this tells us so much more. The flint can tell us a lot, but the bones and the antler and the wood can give us all sorts of insights, as you're about to find out. So this is a photograph that David Lamplugh gave us. This one I like. It's not so the ones in the official Star Carr monograph are all very clean and everything. This one is obviously kind of a working shot. But what I particularly like, I don't know if you can see, is the cow right up there in the top. And I think, and you can also see this collapse of the section there, and I just wonder whether the cow had actually been in the trench. And we actually had a cow in our trench once at Star Carr as well. They managed to get through the fence. So I like that one. But it gives you a sense of scale as well. But from this site, it was absolutely incredible because the finds that were discovered were, again, hugely rare and many of them unique to this country. So Clark found nearly 200 barbed points. These are pictures of barbed points. You can see they're different sort of sizes. One's got a hole in, so it's sort of known as a harpoon. They would have been used for hunting all sorts of different animals, from birds, fish, to larger animals, elk and red deer. There was bear, there was wild boar. By this time, the environment had a wealth of different kinds of animals in it. They're all made out of red deer antler. So they're taking strips of red deer antler and carving them. And they're quite difficult to make. We've had people have a go at making these, and it takes quite a lot of skill to make these objects. But these are incredibly rare. They constitute about, the number of barb points we found at Star Carr, we've got about 95% of all barb points found in this country just from Star Carr. You do get a lot of others on the continent as well, but they tend to be different forms, and they're quite often made out of bone actually, so these are a bit different. Other rare objects are beads. So you have shale beads. In the Mesolithic period, we also know of shale beads down in Wales at a site called Nab Head, and some pieces of amber. There were 3 pieces of amber, one with a perforation and a broken perforation there. And amber's very interesting because you get a lot of amber in Denmark. So yeah, I'm not aware of other sites in this country where we have amber. But perhaps the most famous, the most iconic thing from Star Carr are the headdresses. 21 of these were found by Graham Clark, and these are made out of red deer skulls. They've had the bottom part of the skull, the jaws taken off. They've had the brain removed. They've been modified. The antlers have been modified, cut down, used for somehow tying to the head. We can come on to that a bit more later on. Again, so rare. So there are only 21 of these found, none others known from this country at all, and only a handful known from northern Germany. So a link to the continent, but very, very rare. And Graham Clark, so this is the plan of his trench. He plotted by metre square how many flints were found in every square, well, yard square it was then. And you can see where the red circle is, that's the highest densities. And round the edges, you get not very many. And so I think quite naturally his interpretation was that he'd dug most of the site, that was how big it was. And he was also comparing this to other sites in Denmark and Germany, which were sites of this sort of size. But you'll see that actually the site is much, much larger. So he interpreted this as a settlement right on the edge of the reed swamp, perhaps getting some inspiration from some of the Swiss Neolithic lake village sites, people living right on the edge of the lake in the swamp, which does seem a bit of a strange idea when there was some dry land very close by, and why people would live right there in the swamp. So no further work was done until 1985, and a trench then was put in about 30 metres away by the Vale of Pickering Research Trust, and this was to get some environmental data and to build up a better environmental picture. But as so often happens, they weren't wanting to find any archaeology. They thought they were keeping it away from Clark's trench, but actually in this trench they found flint, they found bone and antler, including a barbed point, and also wood, and this strange sort of what seemed to be a wooden trackway or platform. And when this was examined by Maisie Taylor, who's another world-leading expert in wood, she could see that these planks had been split and hewn, and this was the earliest evidence of carpentry in Europe. So very important, but no further work was done. So I went back to the site with Chantal Canella and Barry Taylor in 2004, and we did a lot of work from 2004 to 2010, digging more areas, more trenches and field walking, and we found that actually this is Clark's excavation, and that's where he thought he got the whole site. But actually doing lots and lots of work across this whole area, all this hashed area is actually covered in Mesolithic material, a Mesolithic flint. And so really, we've only actually excavated probably less than 5% of the whole site. I mean, it's absolutely enormous. And from the dating that we've been doing, we know that the site was lived in for about 800 years. And if you think about that in comparison to the Roman period, that's twice the length of the Roman period. It's a long time for people to be settled in this one place. You can get a sense of the scale here from the test pits that go up the so just this bit here, the peninsula. You know, this is a big field, a big area of occupation. In the last few years, from about, I think it was 2012 to 2015, this is when we got our European money, and we did really big scale excavations. This is a kite shot. And Clark's Trench was in this bit here. I'll come to this, but we did a little bit of excavation of a little bit of that, which is under that tent there. But you can see it still fills with water. It wasn't black. It's not black water, Chris, but it's still dirty water. And all the dark stuff is the peat, and this lighter material is the dry land. And you can get a sense of from the slope here of the dry land going into what would have been the lake edge. So you have to imagine this is lake, and this is the dry land that people probably lived on. So in this area, we've got a number of things that I want to talk to you about. We've got structures, so houses on the dry land. This is the edge of the lake here, and the lake would have come in here. And we've got these platforms I'm going to have a quick look at. And this is Clark's Trench here. So this is how it all relates to Clark's area. So this is one of the structures. This is the earliest house in Britain. Doesn't look very impressive, but it is actually that. And it got a lot of publicity back in 2010 because it is the earliest known one that we have in this country. This is one of the other structures, and you can see how in the middle they seem to be digging out a hollow area. Sometimes there's a post hole in the middle. There are post holes round. There's probably another one up there. And perhaps this is what it looked like, something like this. This is actually from Howick, which is another site that some of you will have heard of that I helped co-direct with Clive Waddington and Jeff Bailey many years ago. This is a reconstruction that Clive Waddington built, covered in turf. This is inside it, just to give you a feel for how big it might have been inside, perhaps with some posts in. Interestingly, that house didn't last very long. As you can see, I went back and visited it a few years after it had been built. Some cows had been in the field and ate the turf and knocked it down. But it does make you think a bit, doesn't it, about, you know, people have tended to think that hunter-gatherers are very nomadic, moving around the country all the time, kind of chasing animals all over the place. But if they're building structures like this, and they're quite substantial, and this structure at Howick was used for over 100 years at least, people were probably not moving around so much. They probably were more settled because they had to look after the sites and the buildings they'd made, because there were some big animals in the landscape at that time. This is another reconstruction we've done of our house at Star Carr. This is at the University of York in our experimental centre. And we've thatched this with reeds. And obviously, being by a reed swamp, that seems to be the most sensible thing they probably used. But we're never going to know exactly what these structures look like. But probably something like that. We have these amazing sort of wooden areas, the platforms, but also this one, which is the earliest part of the site, where you can just see lots and lots of bits of wood, and half of these have been worked. They have been worked using stone tools. And in amongst this, we do get animal bones. So this is the skull of an elk, a very large animal, and we know of elk from other parts of the world at this time. So in Denmark, they have this site here where elk had been buried, again in water, but possibly even in a skin. All the bones of the elk have been put into the water in the skin. So it's quite interesting that, you know, people are putting animals into the shallow waters, and we wonder whether there's some kind of ritual practice. I know archaeologists always like to talk about ritual practice, but we wonder whether there's some kind of ritual practice going on here. Because also we found this other animal in this detrital wood scatter. And when it was being excavated, it just looked like a deer had been placed there. But when Becky, our animal expert, was looking at it, one day she came up to me from the labs and she said, there's something really strange about this deer, red deer, because it's actually got, let me get this right, it's got second left hind limb, forelimb. It has two, my brain's not working now. It's got two limbs which are the same. First left. It had two back legs, which were both left back legs. And so either it was a very odd animal or else there's something else going on here. And what we think is happening is that they were perhaps putting in whole chunks of animals, perhaps whole leg bones, and other bits of the animal, and recreating an animal in the ground, but it wasn't actually from the same animal. This is the next bit of wooden platform that we've got, and you can see there are sort of layers of wood here, layers of timber, 3 layers on top of each other. And it's really quite large, and some of these timbers again have been split and are really, really long, using techniques that are probably quite hard to replicate using flint tools for us without knowledge of these ancient skills. So this is right on the lake edge. We have another one here. This one, this was the trench that was put in the 1980s with the little bit, this is where it was first discovered. And then this is the other side of the trench with that coming through. Then this is another platform here. This is one of our earlier trenches that we put in something like 2008. We missed it by 50 centimetres there, which shows why it's a good idea to do big scale excavations on something like this. So that's another platform. And then this is another one as well. And they seem to date slightly after each other. So they're not all in use at the same time. Now, what they're used for, we don't know really. There are sometimes artifacts associated with them. So this is a lithic concentration just at the end of one of them. And it almost looks like perhaps these pieces of flint have been put in a bag or something and stashed there, and the bag has since deteriorated and the flint's fallen down. There are caches of flint in different places around this site, but it doesn't really tell us how this was used. Because it's right on the edge of the lake and it's quite muddy, perhaps it's there to stabilise the lake edge. Perhaps they were using these platforms to take boats out into the lake. They did have boats then. Again, perhaps they were performing rituals on the platforms. Very difficult to know, but these are incredible feats of engineering for this period, really, and extremely rare. We don't know of anything else like this, really, for this early on. This is a reconstruction by Marcus Abbott of perhaps what this would have looked like with the wood probably just showing out of the top of the water. Now, this area here is really interesting. This is part of, so this area is where Clark excavated. And John Moore, at the end of Clark's excavations, from the letters we gather that John Moore was allowed to go and dig between the trenches. So these are the trenches that Clark dug. And these little strips here are the bits that Moore dug. And I think that that's the material that's in Scarborough Museum from those bits of the trenches. But one bit that he didn't dig was here. And we weren't expecting to find anything. But actually, there was still a lot of material in this just very little strip, this little bulk. And you can sort of, again, imagine what it must have been, what it must have looked like. It was right in the shallows of the lake with the huts in the background. And hopefully this gives you a good impression of just how concentrated these artifacts were. It was absolutely incredible to see this. It's so dense and so rare to see anything like this. Just the bone and the antler and the wood all jam-packed together. And imagine if, in Clark's day, seeing much more of this in much bigger trenches. It is really quite incredible. And within this, again, we get more headdresses. So there's This one here. There's a little roe deer one here, and another little roe deer one up there. And there are some fantastic prints of these headdresses in the room next door. You can see afterwards, including the roe deer one. This is what this one looks like once it had gone through conservation. And if you want to see these are at the Yorkshire Museum, but they also there's also one on display in the rotunda as well. And here's an image that Clark put in his book of a shaman from Siberia who had similar kind of headdress. And so he interpreted this as perhaps, well, either that people were wearing these headdresses and perhaps skins for hunting red deer so that they wouldn't be, perhaps they wouldn't be smelt and they would help in the hunt, or that they were using them as in sort of shamanistic practices and dressing up in this kind of way. And certainly in this part of the world, in Siberia, there's quite a lot of connections with the Mesolithic period in terms of the kinds of material culture, the kinds of artifacts that people have. So it's not impossible to believe that they did have some kind of similar ways of behaving and similar kinds of rituals. And shamans in these cultures, they wear animal headdresses or skins and get dressed up in order to commune with the animal spirits, in order to ensure a good hunt and in order to ensure the health of the people in the village and so on. And here's another reconstruction done by James Dilley where he has drawn what this looks like, but also has dressed up, because there's so many, and I think this picture is so interesting and so important because there's so many bits that don't survive. Even though we get the bone and the antler and the wood, we don't get the skins or the feathers and so on. So it really helps you use your imagination just how much paraphernalia might have also been associated with these costumes. What I also want to point out is, I did mention that in northern Germany, we get similar kinds of headdresses too, showing that perhaps this kind of, whatever practices they are, and if they're shamanistic practices, are perhaps happening across a large area at this time. What's very interesting about the dates from northern Germany, and they've only really been dated quite recently, is that they seem to be of a very similar period, about 9000 BC, and then we're not getting later ones. So perhaps it was quite a short-lived kind of activity that was going on. The other thing that we found at Star Carr, which was very exciting, was this pendant made out of shale. So you saw that we had shale beads before, but we hadn't had any with engravings on them, and these have these amazing little marks. And through the work of Andy Needham, who looked at them under a microscope and analysed them really carefully, which lines crossed over which and so on, we can begin to build up the picture of the order of the lines and try and understand a little bit more about them. But it's very difficult. And they're so small. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's in the Yorkshire Museum as well. But when you see it, it's a very small thing. It doesn't look so small on big screen. This is actually a replica I've got here. And so that's how big it is. A friend of mine, Ruth Mears, made this for me. And she does sell them. So if anyone else wants them, they are rather lovely. But it sort of gives you an impression of how tiny the lines were. And I can't really see them without my glasses on. So going back to this picture of Europe and Star Carr and these other sites numbered over here, which have similar kinds of evidence. It's a big area, and it shows that people, were communicating across large areas and had the same sorts of activities and the same sorts of life ways and lifestyles going on. We can see that from the elk in Denmark, and we can see that from the pendant as well. We've got, as I say, we've got amber at Star Carr. In Denmark, we have a lot of amber pendants with these sorts of geometric lines on and these sort of tally marks and things. So there's definitely some kind of connection there in the kind of jewellery that they're making. So just to sum up really, 10,000 to 8,000 BC, what have we learned? Well, we've got, just after this rapid climate change, people hunted horses and deer in this landscape. And this was probably right after the very rapid climate change, when it's still a tundra-like landscape, and people were probably very mobile then, and we don't have evidence of settlement like we do at Star Carr. They're moving across large areas and across Doggerland, across the North Sea, and into this area. Sometime afterwards, and hopefully we'll find out, but it might have only been decades, maybe hundreds of years, but the environment was richer and more animals were in it. People began to settle at Star Carr. They began to build houses. They began to build these big platforms. They made pendants. They were doing all sorts of things which we don't see in that late Paleolithic period. And we see these connections between what is now Denmark and northern Germany. A lot of people ask, why did they stop living at Star Carr? And we go back to those pictures of the environment and the peat and the build-up of until it became Carr land and there was no water left. And we suspect that actually the peat was encroaching on the site. It was actually growing over the site. And it just wasn't the same kind of environment, same kind of rich environment to live in. And so after about 800 years, people seem to have moved to different parts of the landscape and stopped living at Star Carr. So if you want to know more about this, we have got these books which are open access. They're free, so you can find them online and find out a bit more about some of the excavations we've been doing. And we've also got a website, starcar.com, for further information. But before I finish, I just want to thank Scarborough Archaeological and Historical Society very much for inviting me today, but also for all of you, and there are others of you in the audience who've come and dug with us as well, because we've literally had hundreds of people. I think over 400 people worked on Star Carr, and probably another couple of hundred at Flixton as well. And obviously we can't do that without everybody's hard work. So we've got David Lamplugh, who Chris showed as a young boy, who went to Star Carr and then came and dug with us at Star Carr too, and Chris Evans, and Chris, it's all the Chris's who come and dig with us, and also some others on this slide as well, Anna and Nigel Clark at the back there as well, and Uncle Martin as well came and dug with us too. So thank you all very much for digging with us, and thank you for listening to me give this talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicky. Nicky is able to take a few questions. I think there are some online, actually.
Yeah, if I could just nip in first of all, if that's okay. So the first house you've shown looks exactly like a charcoal burner's hovel of recent times. Is this a continuity?
What was that, from the first slide that was shown?
I think the first house that you showed.
Oh, the first house.
The first house, you said it looks like a charcoal burner's hovel. So I don't know how you would comment on that.
I'm not that familiar with charcoal burners hovels, so well, they are difficult to reconstruct, but I mean, they're not big, and they're not, and they probably had hearths inside, and they're probably quite smoky inside and things as well. So yes, maybe, yeah.
And Emma asked what the plans are for the future.
Yes, good question. Well, we won't be digging again at Star Carr, sadly. We got a lot of money to dig there, and an English Heritage, now Historic England, also supported us with those excavations, and have been brilliant at helping us publish and finish off. So you know, unless we can find several more million to go back there, we probably will never return there, sadly. There are other sites that would be lovely to dig around there, but at the moment we're just concentrating on finishing off the publication for Flixton Island and trying to understand a bit more about this really important horse site. But yeah, I'd love to find some other sites around there. And I think the one thing that we've always said would be really interesting to find is a cemetery or, you know, some human bones, because the one thing we didn't ever find at Star Carr was human bones. So what happened to, how did they, yeah, what did they do with their dead people?
So are there any questions in the audience? Peter Rawson.
Place in Lake Pickering gradually disappeared. You could imagine there being small relic breaks, which again could provide a similar situation. Is anybody, to your knowledge, ever tried to find anywhere?
Any of the others? Yeah, we have. So the team that we work with in Royal Holloway and Southampton have they've been working around the Wycombe area and also looking at LiDAR data and other kind of data to find other little bits of lake. I know Dominic Powsland, I know as well, in further down the Vale, has found peat, but it's so deflated it hasn't preserved very well. So it's you know, probably not there. But I mean, there's probably all sorts of stuff out there. Probably all sorts of other Star Carrs. It's just we need John Moore to be going around the ditches finding more for us.
Any more? Tricia.
How could John Moore tell that the horse bones are that old? I mean, this is pre-carbon dating things, isn't it?
It's a really good question. I was wondering that when you said that as well.
I was sceptical when I
Yeah, I mean, he did. So as well as getting in touch with Graham Clark, Graham Clark was working with the Godwins at the time, who used pollen data to date, really, and that was a technique that had been developed really in Denmark, and from they could tell that the pollen changed, the environment had changed with the change in the cold snap at the end of the Ice Age. So I think that they were using that, and I believe that's how he knew that it was very early. Yeah.
Any more? Right. Well, I'd like to call on Professor Joanne Fletcher, who just happens to be in the audience, to come and give a vote of thanks, please. Thank you.
Hello everybody, and thank you so much, Nicky, for a brilliant lecture. Can I just say what a wonderful way to celebrate 75 years of the Society and launches into the next 75 years. Brilliant combination of traditional archaeology and scientific techniques, which winning combination. So thank you so much. It's been really, really fascinating. So a round of applause, please.
Right, well, thank you everybody. Do join us for refreshments, tea and cakes. And have a look at the 3D printed frontlets and other things. And there's some of our early albums there as well with Raymond Hayes' photographs and Jeff Willett. Thank you.